Some years ago, I had this little dog. His name was Vincenzo. Now, not the dog I have now, but one day I'm on a communion call and driving along the road, and I see this little dog along the side of the road, and someone apparently threw them out of the car. A little beagle puppy, so I put him inside of my car, and I decided to give him my favorite Italian name. I named this little guy Vincenzo. A fun little dog, and after I named him Vincenzo, I taught him absolutely every dog command in Italian. He only knew Italian. He knew absolutely no English at all. And after I taught him all this Italian, I decided now it's time to teach Vincenzo how to catch a Frisbee. So I took my little Vincenzo over to Keystone State Park in New Alexandria to teach him Frisbee. So I get to the park, and I park the car, and I'm really excited about teaching him how to play Frisbee. I got the dog out of the car, but I forgot to close the car window. So he and I are in a park, and we're working on trying to teach him how to catch a Frisbee. And there was a fella there in the park. He had a bunch of fireworks, a bunch of firecrackers. And he started to light these firecrackers, and all this booming sound was just so loud and piercing. Little Vincenzo started to run away. He's running through the park as fast as he could. His little tail was down between his legs, and I went running after him. And I couldn't get him to stop. Then he bolted into the woods. The weeds were thick, and I couldn't go in after him. I spent the next 2 hours canvassing the entire park looking for little Vincenzo, and I couldn't find him. So I thought to myself, I'm going to go back to the car, and I'll start the car, and I'll drive around the park with the car. I can canvass and cover more territory in the car than on foot. And when I got back to the car and opened up the car door and I looked inside, what do you think I found? There he was, Vincenzo, sitting right in the car seat, wagging his little tail. It was then I realized it was a good thing I let the car window down. Now, what I could never figure out is how he was able to jump in through that open window, but he made it. And I thought to myself, Vincenzo, you're not a Christian because you've never been baptized. But if Vincenzo was a Christian, he did a very Christian thing. He was scared. He was worried, he was frightened, and he ran back to the place that gave him security and covering, and that was the car. You see, that's what Jesus Christ says to all of us this morning. That's what God our Father says this morning. If you are scared or ever have been or will be, or you're frightened or you're lonely and you're trying to find security and shelter and a friend, Jesus Christ is saying, come to me, and I will give you all those assets of security and comfort and love and a home. That's the key point of the gospel, which comes out of the 15th chapter of Luke, verses 1 to 10. Now, in today's gospel reading, it's going to give us instructions on how Jesus wants us to follow him and what he will do when we turn away from him and then decide to come back. So let's look at verses 2 to 5 of the 15th chapter of Luke. These are very powerful verses here. Jesus addressed this parable. What man among you having 100 sheep and losing one of them would not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one until he finds it? And when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. And upon his arrival home, he calls together his friends and neighbors and says to them, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. If you have turned your back away from God, if you know some family members right now, maybe a son or daughter or a relative that is lost, that have turned their back on God, and they're saying to themselves, if I come back to God, will he offer me retribution? And you want to say to them, no, God doesn't offer retribution. When you are lost and then you're found and you walk away from God and then you return, what's he going to offer? Retribution? No. Jubilation? Yes. You see, psychologists say that many people, if not all, but typically exclusive statements tend to be wrong. Many people at some point in their life will turn away from God. There's a good chance you might have already in your life. If you haven't, you might. And some people will turn away from God either momentarily or for an hour or for a day or a week, a month, or for a long period of time. They just drift away. Often they drift away, it's unintentional. But they're in a boat, they're out in the ocean, they're along the shore, and the waves just begin to take them out in the ocean. They just drift away. And then they realize when they wake up and see what's happened, how do I get back to the shore? How do I get back to God? Many people wonder in life, what's on the other side of God's life? Light. On the other side of God's life, light is darkness. When a person becomes involved in drugs, and they're rampant today, many families here have probably felt the pain and the residual effect of someone in their life who's been involved in drugs. Because it's either cost them their life or it's costing them their life in the terms of they're just spinning the wheels, getting older, going nowhere. They're stuck in the quagmire of drugs. Many people might be involved in alcohol, and alcohol is rampant. And what's really rampant, and some people are very good at being functional alcoholics. They're an alcoholic, they function, somehow they continue to perform and to do their job. Those around them know it's the real truth. They're lost in alcohol. And how do they turn around? How do they pick themselves up and stop that? A lot of people get involved in immoral behavior, bad behavior. And when your life begins to crumble, and you might know some folks whose life is currently crumbling. And when your life begins to crumble, you say to yourself, I'm going to give up on God. But what you really need to do is to give in to God. God, you're the only one that can save me. And when I'm scared and lonely and I realize what I've done, and I've drifted out to the sea and I want to come back, God, you're the one that's going to rejoice when I return. Fifth verse of Luke, chapter 15. I think President Kennedy describes it very well. You know, shortly after he won the election back in 1960, it was about a month after that, before the inauguration, in January of 61. He and his family, his wife, they went to the Grand Canyon. And he visits the Grand Canyon from the great heights of the southern rim. And he said that view was incredible. But during that same day, after looking at the Grand Canyon from the great heights of the southern rim, he traveled down to the base of the canyon, bad back and all. He made it all the way down to the floor of the canyon, right along the water. And he said from that point, from the depths of the Grand Canyon, he could really feel the heights, the majesty of the Grand Canyon from the bottom, looking up. There was a whole different perspective. And he made this conclusion. He wrote back in 61 as returned back from this vacation. He said in his vacation to the Grand Canyon, experienced it from the heights and the depths. He said, in life, it's only when you've been to the depths can you truly appreciate the heights. Now, he was talking about the Grand Canyon, but that's life. And in life, when life is bottomed out, when your life is bottomed out, it might bottom out, but you might know someone currently whose life is bottoming out. And it's only when you've been to the depths, when everything has fallen apart, your life has crumbled, at that point you realize the majesty of the heights. I got to get back to God. And when I do, will he be angry that I walked away? Will he be angry that I was involved in bad behavior when I was down there celebrating the depths? What's he going to do? What he's going to do is the 5th verse, the 15th chapter of Luke. It says right there, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. If you do know someone who currently is out of control, spiral out of control, they want to kind of turn their life around, do you preach to them? You beat them to death on telling them to change their life and to turn around? What's the best thing to do? Especially if they're worrying, how is God going to treat me because I've done things I should not have done. I turned my back on Christ for a long time. What should I do? Just tell them. Just go to verse 2 and 5 of the 15th chapter of Luke. And what you're going to find is how Jesus Christ will treat you once you've been lost and now you're found. You went wayward and now you came back. You drift out to the ocean, now you're back to the beach. These are some powerful words. And I'll close with these words again because they mean so much to the person who's lost, scared, and lonely. Powerful words. Jesus addressed this parable. But this is the way Jesus feels in his heart. This is how he treats those who have done exactly what happens in this reading. What man among you having 100 sheep and losing one of them will not leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one until he finds it? And when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. And upon his arrival home, he calls together his friends and neighbors and says to them, and there it is, rejoice with me because I found my lost sheep. That's the way Jesus will treat all of us when we drift away, when we come back. No retribution, only jubilation.